What if I told you that TCGNA was right all along? What if I told you that they tried to tell us and we didn't believe them? We laughed at them. What if I told you that Ashe versus Servant of Endymion ruling that we got in that email all those months ago was correct all along? Let's talk about it. Before we get started, I just wanted to let you guys know that this video is sponsored by YGOLegacy.com. They sell all sorts of Yu-Gi-Oh singles and will surely have what you're looking for. Don't forget to use promo code CODER5 at checkout for 5% kickback in the form of store credit once you complete a purchase. What's going on, guys? Distant Coder here, and just last night the OCG put out a statement saying that come the new Master Rule revision on April 1st, they're going to be changing 5 major rules on how the game works. So basically there are 5 big rules that are going to be changing, and it's going to impact our game. It's absolutely going to impact our game. These so far are going to be only in the OCG, but they're probably going to be moving over to the TCG as well. So I wanted to go over them with you guys and let you guys know what these changes are, what this implies for the TCG, what different interactions are changing, and basically I just wanted to let people know because I saw a lot of people that were trying to understand what the new rules were and how they worked and these different interactions, and a lot of people were misunderstanding how they actually worked. So I wanted to break them down for you guys and let you guys know exactly how these 5 new different interactions work. So let's just jump into it. So the first interaction that is going to be changing refers to the main deck and the extra deck, specifically more the extra deck, but it means the extra deck is going to be working a lot more like the main deck is currently. So in the current game, if a card like Eternal Soul, who has an effect when it leaves the field, is shuffled back into the deck, it won't be able to trigger because we all know that cards and effects cannot be activated in the deck unless they are specifically listed in its text that they can. The extra deck was not abiding by this rule, so a card like Curious the Lightsworn Dominion, if shuffled back into the extra deck, would still trigger because it had a when this card leaves the field effect, it would still be able to activate in the extra deck. Now, this new rule basically changes that. So if a card like Curious the Lightsworn Dominion or Elemental Hero Absolute Zero gets shuffled back into your extra deck, because they're shuffled back into the extra deck face down, the extra deck now abides by the same type of rules as the main deck. So Absolute Zero or Curious will not be able to trigger in your extra deck. This is the first major rule that is being changed, and I saw a lot of people were referencing this and saying that the extra deck was now considered as a second main deck, which is just not correct. So one thing that I saw floating around and that I wanted to demystify early is that cards like Spiral Resort that have a maintenance cost to shuffle back a monster in the graveyard back into the deck, it still will not be able to shuffle back an extra deck monster because the extra deck is considered different than the main deck. Along those lines, same thing, Blackwing Zephyros the Elite in the graveyard cannot bounce an extra deck monster back into your extra deck to summon itself. That is still not a legal action. It must still bounce to the hand, and Spiral Resort still has to shuffle a monster back into the main deck. So this difference only implies that monsters that have a when this card leaves the field effect, even if they are mandatory, will not be able to trigger if they are shuffled back into the extra deck. So the second big change that we're getting impacts how trigger effects work. So currently in the TCG, we already have a regional difference between TCG NA and TCG EU. In TCG EU, cards do not need to be where they met their trigger in order to activate their effect, whereas in NA, they do. So basically what this means is, say I activate Twin Twister, discarding Graph Mail Branch of the Burning Abyss as cost, and then my opponent as Chainlink 2 activates DD Crow, banishing the Graph. In NA, because the Graph isn't in the graveyard where it met its trigger, it won't be able to activate its effect, whereas in EU, it doesn't need to be where it meets its trigger in order to activate. So in EU, the Graph here would be able to activate, in NA, it wouldn't. Originally, in the OCG had the same rule set as EU on trigger effects activating in a different location. Now, the OCG is going to be abiding by this new rule, and it's basically going to be adopting the rule set of TCG NA. So OCG is jumping ship, it's no longer following the same rule set as TCG EU, it's going to instead be following the same rule set as TCG NA regarding card effects activating in a different location than where they met its trigger. So in the situation in the OCG, if you Twin Twister discard Graph and the opponent chains DD Crow, banishing the Graph, In the OCG, as of April 1st, the graph will not be able to activate. Now, the third big difference that we're getting impacts how cards like Card of Demise or Lava Golem prevent you from performing certain actions in the turn that those cards are used. So, basically, previously in the OCG as well as in our current TCG game, if I say activated Unexpected Die to special summon a monster, and my opponent responded with Ash Blossom, negating the effect of my Unexpected Die, I wouldn't be allowed to legally afterwards activate Card of Demise, because Card of Demise says you can't special summon monsters the turn you activate this card. So basically, the game recognized that I attempted a special summon, and for that reason, I wasn't allowed to use Card of Demise. Alternatively, if I summoned Lava Golem to my opponent's side of the field, Lava Golem says you cannot normal summon the turn you special summon this card. If the opponent negates the summon of Lava Golem with, say, Solemn Strike, for example, I wouldn't be allowed to normal summon afterwards because I attempted the summon of Lava Golem. Now, what this new rule changes is that as long as the summon was not successful, it does not count. Basically, they're erasing attempted summons from the game. So in a situation like this, if I Unexpected Die and my opponent responds with Ash Blossom, because I didn't successfully special summon a normal monster from my deck, I would be allowed to activate Card of Demise. Same thing for Lava Golem. If I tribute two of my opponent's monsters and I summon Lava Golem to their side of the field, and my opponent negates the summon of Lava Golem with Solemn Strike, the attempted summon is no longer a thing. So for this reason, because Lava Golem wasn't successfully special summoned, the restriction on Lava Golem that restricts the amount of normal summons that I can perform in the turn no longer applies. Basically, if the summon is not successful of Lava Golem, the restriction placed on the card will not be applied because the monster was never considered to have been special summoned. Okay, now this next big change is a big one, okay? So they're changing how cards that say that they can only be special summoned once per turn, or just summoned in general, so cards that can only be summoned once per turn, named on the card, for example, Sky Striker Ace Kagari, Zodiac Dryden, Servant of Endymion, all these cards, if they are not successfully summoned, it doesn't count towards the amount of times you can attempt to summon that card in a turn. So currently in the TCG, if my opponent summons Sky Striker Ace Kagari and I Solemn Strike the summon, they cannot attempt to summon another one. However, the OCG are overturning this rule and are changing it to, if the card is not successfully summoned, it doesn't count towards the limit of times you can summon it in that turn. So in the OCG moving forward as of April 1st, if they summon Sky Striker Ace Kagari and you Solemn Strike the summon, if they find a way to put another Sky Striker monster on the field, they can attempt to summon Sky Striker Ace Kagari again. Now, alternatively, if you look at a card like Servant of Endymion, we knew in the past that if Servant of Endymion attempted to use its effect in the Pendulum Scale to summon itself and a monster from the deck, and you responded with Ash Blossom, originally they would not be able to attempt the summon of Servant of Endymion again that turn because they already attempted to summon it. So the difference here is that the OCG are turning back on this ruling, and because the summon of Servant of Endymion was not successful, you will be able to use the effect again. Now this is quite big because previously there was an email that was sent out to TCG US and they had said that you could still attempt to summon it again because the summon was not successful. Now maybe they had this information ahead of time and they sort of leaked it, or there was just a mistake originally, but moving forward in the OCG, they will be able to attempt the summoning effect in the Pendulum Scale of Servant of Endymion again if the original activation or the original effect was negated. One big card that is going to need a major overhaul, and they're going to basically need to change what the card says, is Summon Limit, because Summon Limit currently reads, neither player can summon more than 2 times per turn, negated summons count towards this limit, negated cards or effects that would summon do not count. So basically, they're going to have to change this because a monster whose summon gets negated, so say I try to normal summon my opponent's Solemn Warnings, in the current text on Summon Limit, that summon would still count towards Summon Limit, but because of these new changes, that summon shouldn't count for Summon Limit. So Summon Limit is most likely going to be getting an errata, it's going to be changing for the future, and it does make the card just ever so slightly weaker, but that's just how it's going to have to be. If they translate these changes over to the TCG, we're going to be seeing an errata for this card for sure. And last but not least, the final change that they're bringing over to the OCG come the April 1st, 2020 revision is that trap cards that are also treated as monsters, so cards like Embodiment of Apophis, for example, who summon themselves as a monster but are still considered a trap card, originally, these cards would still take up a spot in your spell and trap zone. So if you activate Embodiment of Apophis and you summon it to your field, there was still the original spell trap zone that the card was in could not be used. Now, the difference that they're changing here is that that spell trap zone is no longer considered in use. So if you summon Embodiment of Apophis in the form of a trap monster, you will still be able to set 5 back row, and Embodiment of Apophis will not take up one of those zones. Now, one of the important things that came to mind was that we know that if a trap monster that is still considered as a trap card gets met with a card like Book of Moon, the card should reset itself in the spell trap zone. So I was wondering how this would interact if you had a trap monster on your field and 5 back row, and your opponent activates Book of Moon on your Embodiment of Apophis, for example. Now, most likely, the way this would play out is that the Embodiment of Apophis would attempt to set itself back in the spell trap zone, would realize that it cannot, and would simply send itself to the graveyard. Now, we don't have confirmation on this. This is a little bit of extrapolation on my part, but this is how I assume this interaction is going to work. So yeah, moving forward with these trap monsters, they will no longer be taking up a spot in the spell trap zone, and this can kind of be big because you do have some decks like Shaddoll's that do have really good trap monsters. And there's also this Eldritch archetype that's coming out soon. So the Eldritch archetype are traps that are also considered as monsters, but they're still traps. So this whole interaction is still going to be important for that deck when it comes out. So it's going to be really interesting to see how this new rule set really changes how the OCG plays. I think that these rulings are probably going to be moving over to the TCG, both EU and NA. I think that they really do want to unify how all these different regions work and how they rule different interactions. So I do think that come April 1st, 2020, not only will the OCG be applying these rules, but I think the TCG NA and TCG EU will be applying them as well. However, I can't speculate that. So basically, you're gonna have to wait on an official Konami statement in order to know whether or not we're going to be applying these rules. So as it currently stands, you should still be applying the rules that you know to be correct in the TCG, both in NA and EU, the way they are being applied now. These new rules don't apply to us just yet, but I do think that they will be applying to us in the future. So anyways, guys, that was it for me. I hope you really enjoyed this video. I hope you now understand how these new OCG rulings work, and I hope to see you all in the next video. Don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe, and I'll see you all next time. Peace out, y'all.